Good morning, everyone. Sunday, June 6th, Houston, Texas. We are broadcasting virtually from the studio in our home. We look forward to getting into our new skylit temple sometime in the not too distant future. And we will continue to, of course, be broadcasting, but hopefully also be meeting in person. It's lovely to see all of you on a Sunday morning when we're quite fresh and sunny right now in Houston. We've had quite a bit of rain. So we use this opportunity to do a little teaching before our meditation program that starts at 11 a.m. Central Time, and then we will have a Dharma conversation together at noon for those who are interested in spending some time chatting with one another. So things are changing, and we are moving back into our lives. And one of the values that I like to talk about, and people quote back nowadays, is freshness. I wanted to continue to explore freshness a bit. We have an opportunity now with our moving back into things opening up more, doing more activities in public. We have an opportunity to really look at things with fresh eyes. We have an opportunity to reconsider our priorities. And often when we think about priorities, we start moving towards to-do lists, which have a lot to do with gross motor activities. And I think that what I'm interested in talking about today, and Anne will also talk about, is with things moving back into more opening, we have an opportunity to look at our, not just our gross motor activities, but our motivations and our awareness. One of my clients recommended a book to me. It's called No Self, No Problem. It's a kind of an interesting book. It's written by a neuropsychologist. And the neuropsychologist is making the case that the hard and fast self that we all are so involved with from birth, really, that we take to be so real and reified. Even in neuropsychology, they're having some interesting times trying to identify what is this self that we take to be so real and so reified. And in the book, he talks quite a bit about the difference between the left brain and the right brain. And he talks about another book by a neuroanatomist named Jill Bolte Taylor, which is called My Stroke of Insight. And if you're interested in a kind of a hoot of an experience, you can watch her webcast, TED Talk, My Stroke of Insight, Jill Bolte Taylor, because she's a woman who was Harvard neuroanatomist, who was really, really aware of the left brain and the right brain and the diverse functions involved in both. And she describes having a stroke in which her left brain is pretty much knocked out. And she pretty much goes into pure right brain experience. And it's quite moving. You know, the first time, it's interesting, the first time I heard it, I was in a car and I was just approaching Whole Foods to do some shopping, but I was so captivated by what she was saying. I just sat there and listened to the whole TED Talk, which is not my inclination to sit in a car and listen to a TED Talk. Turns out that, you know, the neuroanatomy is a bit of a, it's one set of metaphors that describes our internal experience. And, you know, I don't think we should get totally captivated by it or restricted by it, but the left brain is pretty much our ordinary chit chat, planning, problem solving, effective, make it happen in the world brain. And it is the aspect of way of being in the world that is really dominant and emphasized in our educational system, and which is pretty much the coin of exchange in our culture. How to think about things, how to do things, how to be effective. And the right brain is much less verbal, much more emotional, much more oriented towards global impressions, seeing connections, feeling totalistic. The left brain is, because it's involved with kind of judgments, concepts, reification, it's very, very quick to lose particularity and granularity. It's not really oriented towards feelings, the left brain. If we were just living in our left brain, we might feel kind of numb. And in fact, I think a lot of us from time to time know what that feels like. Kind of a narrow range of affect, being able to buzz through a lot of choices with our thoughts, but it may not feel very, very rich. And we may have a kind of haunting sense of there could be more. And that haunting sense is probably from, certainly in childhood. Turns out the first 2 or 3 years of life, the right brain is really what is functioning early on. And I'm not even sure what this means, but the left brain is not myelinated until about age 2 or 3. It's not really fully functional until we're age 2 or 3. And so when we're very, very young, we have a kind of more immersive, holistic, emotionally rich sense of life. Again, we are reemerging in a way like babies now into our lives in a kind of new way. And I think whether we want to or not, it's going to feel fresh. It's going to feel different. feels strange. And that is a kind of maybe automatic and unintentional opening to the right brain. It turns out that the meditative traditions, and especially the fundamental meditations that we do in terms of placing our attention on our breathing and focusing on a syllable, cultivating attention, cultivating fresh attention towards our experience, an attention that is not judgmental, an attention that is not instrumental. We're not trying to change our experience. We are just paying attention. We're paying attention either to the breath or paying attention to a syllable. And we're doing it with curiosity, openness, and acceptance, and gentleness. So the doing in our practice is attentional. But there's another aspect to the process of attention. There is the kind of doing to attention, and there's being aware of what we're being aware of in a kind of focused, steady, present modality. Typically with our left brain, what we're doing is kind of choo-choo train attentionality. We're thinking of this, we're thinking of the next thing, we're wondering about the next thing, we just keep moving, moving, moving. And with the breathing, we're just tracking. And we're also very significantly sensing. And that does seem to be very, very much tied into the right brain. We're sensing. And we're sensing in the present. And it turns out that as we slow down and we sense and we're paying attention, we're opening ourselves to what we're feeling. We're opening ourselves to actually a kind of more global presencing. We can feel more immersed in a sense of totality. And so our practice is an invitation to freshness. It rides on a fresh attitude. That's kind of the path. Practice is bringing a fresh attitude towards our attention. The fruition of our practice in the moment is a fresh awareness. We don't know what that will feel like. We don't know what our breath will feel like with fresh awareness. And it's okay. And so much of our effort in life is to assure that we know the outcome of an event and the outcome of life. So part of what is going on nowadays as we reemerge is maybe we don't know what it will be like when we go back to a restaurant, a movie theater, a classroom, our workplace. And our practice is engaging a muscle of freshness, bringing whatever capacity for being open, curious, accepting, non-judgmental to our momentary experience, and then allowing freshness to appear in our experience. in whatever way it affects us. We don't know. We have a not know mind how our practice will affect us. And so I would just encourage everyone, as we are re-engaging, to allow the kind of freshness we cultivate together in our practice to also come into the moments of our lives as we re-enter, emerging out of the lockdown that we've all been experiencing during the pandemic. I'll hand it over to Anne at this point.
Thanks. This freshness, this engaging is also relational, of course. And having reflected through following Harvey's discussion right now on sort of the inner intention and experience of allowing ourselves not to know fully, to allowing ourselves to be present, to see, to be curious. This also is very significant in terms of being with other people, other beings, being in our environment and connecting and relating to it. And this too is something that we will re-engage in our new, less pandemical environment as we go out and meet with people. And somebody posted recently, this going back to social life is more difficult than I had anticipated. So some people are going forth eagerly, and some are, oh, gee, I can't hide in my house anymore, quite as, it's not quite as, it won't be quite as socially acceptable. So what is that about? When we are oriented toward freshness, we don't assume that we know what is going on with another person. We pay attention. And attention is the start of love. It's the start of connection. It's the start of dialogue. It's the start of being in a state of responsiveness with another person. In other words, it's totally aligned with our deep, deep value and constant orientation to compassion, love, being in connection. Being in connection with ourselves gives us a basis for connecting with others. I think that one of the reasons sometimes we feel resistant to going out and mixing it up with other people is because there is a way, there's a possibility that we'll somehow lose our sense of wholeness. We'll give it up. We'll become kind of a puppet in responding to the other person in sort of mechanical or habitual ways. And that's hard not to do, actually. Hard not to react out of patterns. How are you? Good, great. How are you? Fine. What did you do? Oh, I saw a movie, or, these kinds of conversations, which can be very energetic, but they're not fulfilling. You don't learn any more about the other person, really. You don't share any more about yourself either. And there's a kind of same status quo. We all have scripts. And to repeat them, can be reassuring. Oh, we know what to say next. But also, it's not as alive as we might like to be. So one of the things associated with this process of being fresh can also relate it to another important topic for us, deep listening. We've talked about that occasionally. As you know, all traditional Dharma teachings begin with how to listen, how to be there, how to take in information, not to overwhelm it with what you previously had in mind, not to kind of block it out and give a rote response. It's a different kind of energy to be present in that way. It is more complete. It's more whole. Harvey used the word totalizing. There is an awakened quality to wholeness and not getting too caught up in any one detail, but paying attention granularly and still being somehow present in the heart, not so zeroed in on some topic that we forget actually about, just noticing, how the other person is, what changes in their face, what changes in their posture. When do they turn away? They seem to be losing connection. So, our conversations are really a sequencing of, connecting and then sometimes sort of forgetting, going into our own space, coming back with something. Deep listening, which is a sense of aliveness to hear. So it's an interesting state. It means being quiet in a certain way, quieting, the inner dialogue of what am I going to say next? How am I looking? How am I doing in this conversation? All of those things that easily overwhelm are just listening. So dropping that and actually listening and responding out of what we hear, what we see, what we feel. And discovering that every moment is something new. I never thought they'd say that. I didn't think I'd say this. There can be this element of surprise, freshness, not as going off script. And this going off script and this being present is related to connection and compassion, as I said. It's also related to another deep value that we have, kind of equanimity. Equanimity, as we've said many times, isn't a state of dullness or indifference. It's a state of being even in the sense of not projecting, oh, this is going to be boring, this is going to be tiring, this is going to take too long, this is how this person always is, this is how I always am. It's also not being overwhelmed by strong, oh, I don't like this, or I do like this, and I like it so much, I'm actually forgetting about even my own real feelings. There's this just sort of an excitement, but not an excitement in which I'm connected with my own lived experience. That's another kind of important word, our actual lived experience. We live so much in our heads. We live so much in our idea of what is going on. Wouldn't it be lovely to be a little more in our bodies? Body is part of deep listening. Body is part of equanimity. A certain kind of settling, a certain kind of allowing things to arise and responding to those very things. Freshness, connected, deep listening, kind of equanimity. And with that equanimity comes a kind of openness. And equanimity itself is connected with two important types of wisdom. The Buddhists, particularly the Tibetans, talk about 5 types of wisdom. And our path, that fruitional state of being present that Harvey mentioned, our path is a path from a more ordinary kind of dullish, habitually structured state or mind to something a little more alive. The Suzuki Roshi called big mind, wisdom mind. There's a difference between a mind that's imbued with, let's say, the wisdom of equanimity, and or let's say the quality of equanimity, which is associated with the wisdom of sameness. Now, what's the wisdom of sameness? That is also not some dull expanse of one moment being the same as another moment. Quite the contrary. It's an aliveness to a kind of essential state of being present, of being open, of not being overly impacted by rote kind of responsiveness. Or, somebody pushes our button. Well, a button is something we push to get a kind of mechanical reaction. And that happens when our buttons get pushed also. This is what I do when somebody scratches the blackboard of my particular, psychic, emotional, my shoulders hunch, my voice squeaks. I feel really irritated. I grit my teeth so the person won't notice that how irritated I am, whatever. The wisdom of sameness is holding a kind of space of evenness, balance. These are all synonyms for this state of freshness in which, because there's something that's kind of always the same, we can notice whatever is occurring. And this goes hand in hand with the second wisdom associated with equanimity, which is the wisdom of reality itself, the Dharma Dhatu, the space-like nature of our being. The space-like nature of our being means that there's room for anything to arise. And yet, in another deep way, nothing changes, like space. Space is such that anything can happen. Reality is such that anything can arise, good or bad, and we don't know what will come next. And being fresh, being in the real space of our lives, being in equanimity, orienting toward the wisdom of sameness, the wisdom that knows reality, is a state of really open freshness. And on the one hand, it's orientation to wisdom. On the other hand, it's a not knowing. It's leaving the rickety raft of what we think we know about what will happen next. And that can be scary. We've talked in our practices. What happens when you find out that, the mind or me that you thought was there isn't exactly? And sometimes people will say, well, it's a little uncomfortable because there's that don't know mind. And we ground ourselves in certain kinds of knowing, but we ground ourselves often in a knowing that is actually a separation from what is real, not a presence to what is happening in ourselves and another person, but something we sort of made up that's not as fresh. So I'm saying all these things because when we spoke last night and Harvey said, he wanted to offer some more about freshness at this moment, I wanted to think, and everything I have said has been prompted by my curiosity, my don't know mind, about how this freshness actually syncs up with one of our most crucial kind of practice points that we recite on a regular basis, Shantideva's great verse, for as long as space abides. For as long as space abides, that's a long, long time, but it's not a time, it's a time in every moment of which something else can happen. As long as the world remains, something is always changing. For that long, may I be there in my freshness, in my fullness, responding to what is needed in the world. All these things coming together, equanimity, deep listening, wisdom, sameness, reality, coalesced in these precious two lines at the heart of our intentions as practitioners. So I'll stop with that and give us a moment to digest, just sit, and we'll pick up our practice.